The Interstellar Union called it an act of compassion. That was the phrase repeated throughout the declaration. Compassion. The word appeared in the official document 4 times. It was spoken before a gathering of hundreds of civilizations inside the Union's assembly sphere, transmitted through every public communications network, translated into thousands of languages, and preserved in archives that stretched across known space. The repetition was deliberate. The authors clearly believed that if a decision sounded gentle enough, perhaps history would remember it kindly. History would not. What the declaration actually announced was the removal of humanity from the Interstellar Union. Earth's diplomatic status was revoked. Human-operated facilities beyond human territory were seized. Research stations, mining colonies, communications hubs, and commercial ports built over 16 years of membership were placed under Union administration. A colony vessel carrying more than 700 settlers toward a distant world was intercepted halfway through its journey. The passengers were relocated into administrative custody while the ship itself was confiscated. Then came the final provision. A 600 light-year isolation boundary surrounding the Sol system. No Union member species was permitted to trade with humanity. No official communications were allowed. No cooperative agreements could be maintained. Humanity would remain inside its assigned borders. The Union referred to it as a protective measure. Most humans called it what it really was: exile. Admiral Elena Ward sat in the public gallery when the declaration was read. She had not attended as a representative. Human military officers had no speaking authority within the assembly sphere. She was simply an observer, a woman sitting quietly among spectators while the future of her species was discussed by people who had already made their decision months earlier. For nearly 4 hours, she listened to the vote. One civilization after another. Approval. 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 The pattern became obvious long before the count was finished. When the final tally appeared, only 21 civilizations had opposed the resolution. The rest supported it. What Elena remembered most clearly was not the vote itself. It was what happened afterward. The applause. The chamber erupted into celebration. Not polite acknowledgement. Not solemn recognition of a difficult political decision. Celebration. Representatives stood. Some embraced. Others clapped enthusiastically. Many looked relieved. Elena sat motionless. She watched hundreds of civilizations celebrate humanity's removal from the organization that claimed to represent galactic unity. The moment revealed more than the resolution itself ever could. The Union often described itself as a community. Communities did not applaud exile. Empires did. By the time the session ended, Elena understood something important. The vote had not been motivated by fear. Humanity was not powerful enough to frighten the Union. It had been motivated by something else. Loss of control. Humans had become inconvenient. Not because they violated laws. Not because they started wars. But because they formed connections. Real connections. Friendships. Relationships between individuals that existed beyond committees, regulations, and bureaucratic oversight. During humanity's years of membership, human engineers had worked alongside alien scientists. Human traders had built partnerships with alien merchants. Human explorers had shared risks and victories with crews from dozens of species. The relationships were genuine. The problem was that genuine relationships could not be controlled. The oldest political blocs within the Union had spent centuries maintaining influence through carefully managed alliances and economic dependencies. Humans disrupted that system simply by treating people as people. The Assembly had decided that was dangerous. And now humanity was paying the price. The transport carrying Elena back toward Earth left Union space 2 days later. She spent most of the journey alone. The ship's observation deck overlooked the stars. Normally, she enjoyed the view. This time, she barely noticed it. Her attention remained fixed on reports scrolling across her tablet. Asset seizures, trade collapses, supply chain disruptions, diplomatic withdrawals. Thousands of pages documenting the immediate consequences of humanity's expulsion. Most of the passengers aboard the transport looked defeated. Some were angry. Others seemed frightened. Elena understood both reactions. She shared neither. Because beneath the disappointment, beneath the frustration, another realization had begun to form. The Union had made a mistake. A very large mistake. At first, she couldn't fully explain why. The feeling existed only as instinct. A pattern hidden beneath larger events. But the longer she studied the reports, the clearer it became. The isolation boundary removed humanity from Union markets. It also removed Union authority from humanity. For 16 years, every major scientific project had required approval. Every advanced propulsion system required review. Every large-scale industrial expansion required permits. Every military innovation faced restrictions. Officially, the rules existed to preserve stability. Unofficially, they ensured younger civilizations remained dependent upon older ones. Humanity had accepted those limitations because membership seemed valuable. Now the limitations were gone. The realization settled into Elena's thoughts like a seed. By the time the transport entered the Sol system, the seed had already begun growing. 2 weeks later, she stood before the Earth Council. Representatives from every major nation occupied the chamber. Economic advisors filled entire rows. Military leaders watched from elevated observation platforms. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone expected grim assessments, disaster projections, recovery plans. No one expected Elena's opening statement. "They've handed us an opportunity." The room became silent. Several council members exchanged confused looks. One representative actually laughed. Not because he found the statement amusing, because he genuinely thought she was joking. Elena wasn't. She activated the central display. A three-dimensional map appeared above the chamber. It showed humanity's position before expulsion. Hundreds of regulations surrounded Earth like invisible chains. Approval pathways, review systems, technology restrictions, trade dependencies, bureaucratic frameworks layered over one another until the image resembled a cage. 16 years, Elena said calmly. We've been operating inside this structure. She expanded the projection. The restrictions became more visible. Research limitations, manufacturing limits, navigation constraints, communication controls. Everyone justified in the name of cooperation. Everyone reducing independence. The council watched quietly. Then Elena removed the overlay. The cage vanished. Only open space remained. "This is our situation now." A woman representing the Pacific Alliance frowned. "We've lost access to half the galaxy." "No," Elena replied. "We've lost permission." The room fell silent again. "There's a difference." For the next 6 hours, she presented a proposal unlike anything the council had ever considered. It wasn't a military strategy. It wasn't a diplomatic initiative. It wasn't even an economic recovery plan. It was a construction project. The largest construction project in human history. Humanity would stop relying on Union infrastructure. Humanity would build its own communications network, its own transportation systems, its own industrial zones, its own deep space colonies. Most importantly, humanity would expand beyond the regions the Union cared about. The maps displayed throughout the presentation revealed a simple truth. The Union controlled enormous territory, but not all territory. Beyond its charted borders existed vast regions of unexplored space, remote sectors, neglected systems, entire stretches of the galaxy considered economically irrelevant. To the Union, they were empty. To Elena, they were freedom. When the meeting ended, the council approved the initiative. Not unanimously, not enthusiastically, but decisively. Humanity began building immediately. The following 18 months would later become known as the Great Expansion. Factories operated continuously. Shipyards multiplied. Research institutions abandoned decades of restrictions overnight. Scientists previously forced to work within approved parameters suddenly found themselves unrestricted for the first time in their careers. Progress accelerated beyond anything even Elena had predicted. The first expedition launched 14 months after the expulsion. 20 ships, nearly 10,000 specialists, engineers, researchers, architects, technicians, and colonists. Their destination was a star system 70 light-years beyond the edge of Union charts, a place so remote that no major power had ever considered claiming it. The expedition established Haven 1. For months later, another expedition founded Haven 2, then Haven 3, then Haven 4. Within a year, a network of settlements began spreading through the darkness beyond known space. The Union remained unaware. Its attention focused inward. Its leaders convinced humanity was isolated and declining behind the quarantine boundary. They never imagined the opposite was happening. By the time the second year began, thousands of humans lived beyond Union territory. Factories operated among unexplored stars. Shipyards produced entirely new classes of vessels. Communication relays connected distant settlements into a single growing network. And deep beneath a research complex on Mars, a physicist named Dr. Sophia Hart prepared to unveil a discovery that would change everything. Elena received the message late at night. The subject line contained only 3 words. It finally works. She stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she smiled for the first time in months. Because she knew exactly what those words meant. And she knew the galaxy was about to become much smaller. Elena arrived at the Mars Research Directorate less than 12 hours after receiving Sophia Hart's message. The facility had been constructed decades earlier beneath the surface of Vias Marineris, originally intended for propulsion research considered too dangerous for populated regions. During humanity's years inside the Interstellar Union, most of its laboratories had sat half idle. The Union's regulations prohibited several lines of theoretical investigation, particularly those involving advanced space-time manipulation. Those restrictions no longer existed. As Elena walked through the facility's central corridor, she noticed something she hadn't seen in a long time. Excitement. Not cautious optimism. Not bureaucratic enthusiasm manufactured for funding reports. Real excitement. Researchers hurried through hallways carrying tablets loaded with data. Engineers stood in small groups arguing over equations. Technicians looked exhausted and thrilled at the same time. The atmosphere reminded Elena of stories she'd heard about humanity's earliest space programs. A civilization discovering frontiers faster than it could document them. Sophia Hart met her inside a secure testing chamber. The physicist looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her hair was a mess. Her expression was triumphant. "I assumed the message wasn't an exaggeration," Elena said. Sophia grinned. "Not even close." She activated a display. A holographic projection appeared between them. At first it looked like a standard spacetime model. Then the numbers began updating. Elena's eyebrows rose. She checked them again. Then a third time. "That's impossible." Sophia smiled wider. It was impossible under Union-approved physics. The display rotated. New calculations appeared. Transit velocities. Energy requirements. Operational projections. Every number told the same story. The breakthrough worked. Human faster-than-light travel had just changed forever. During its years of membership, Earth's ships traveled at speeds considered acceptable for developing civilizations. Fast enough to participate. Slow enough to remain dependent. Union courier vessels were significantly faster. Military fleets faster still. The imbalance guaranteed influence. Distance created hierarchy. Sophia's drive erased that hierarchy. Completely. Transit times that once required months could now be completed in days. Journeys previously measured in years became routine operations. The implications hit Elena immediately. The isolation boundary around humanity stretched 600 light-years. Under previous propulsion standards, it represented a significant obstacle. Under the new system, it was little more than a short voyage. The Union had built a wall. Humanity had just invented a way to step over it. "When can we deploy it?" Elena asked. Sophia didn't hesitate. "Prototype ships immediately. Fleet-wide. Within a year." Elena stared at the projections. Every major challenge she'd spent months solving suddenly looked different. Expansion accelerated. Communication improved. Logistics transformed. But most importantly, opportunity expanded. Because there was something she'd been thinking about ever since the vote. The 21 civilizations that had opposed humanity's expulsion. 21 governments willing to stand against overwhelming political pressure. 21 species that had voted no. The Union believed those votes had been insignificant. Elena suspected otherwise. She turned toward Sophia. "The exploration fleet gets priority." Sophia nodded. "I assumed that. We need to find people." The physicist studied her for a moment. The 21. The 21. Sophia smiled. "You've been planning this since the assembly, haven't you?" "Yes." "What exactly?" Elena looked at the stars visible through the chamber's observation screen. "A future." 3 months later, the first vessel equipped with the new drive left Haven 1. Its destination wasn't a resource-rich system. It wasn't a strategic location. It wasn't even inside unexplored territory. Its destination was the homeworld of the Kareth, one of the 21 species that had voted against humanity's removal. The mission traveled quietly. No public announcements. No Union communication channels. No official diplomatic requests. Humanity had spent 16 years learning how the Union monitored interactions between civilizations. Now it used that knowledge to move unseen. The ship arrived in Kareth space 6 days after departure. 6 days. The journey would previously have required months. The crew transmitted a simple message. United Earth Republic vessel requesting dialogue. The response came several hours later. Permission granted. The Kareth reception team met the humans aboard an orbital station overlooking a blue-white gas giant. The lead representative was an elderly statesman named Taran Vel. He entered the conference room expecting a routine conversation. Instead, he stopped abruptly upon seeing the human delegation. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he laughed softly. I knew it. The human ambassador blinked. Knew what? Taran settled into his chair. That exile wouldn't stop you. The humans exchanged glances. Taran continued. The Union believed isolation would weaken your species. He shook his head. They don't understand humanity very well. The meeting lasted 14 hours. No treaties were discussed. No demands were made. No bargaining occurred. Instead, the participants talked about politics, history, exploration, the future. At the end of the conversation, the human delegation presented Taran with a data package. The complete specifications for Sophia Hart's propulsion system. Taran stared at the file, then at the humans, then back at the file. This technology changes everything. We know, and you're giving it to us. Yes. His expression became suspicious. What do you want in return? The lead human diplomat smiled. Nothing. Taran frowned. Nothing. We came to say thank you. The old statesman looked genuinely confused. For what? For voting no. Silence filled the room. The Kareth officials exchanged uncertain glances. Eventually Taran spoke quietly. You crossed hundreds of light years to thank us. No. The diplomat shook his head. We crossed hundreds of light years because we remember who stood beside us. That answer changed something. Not immediately, not dramatically, but noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Barriers lowered. The conversation became personal, human. When the delegation departed 3 days later, Taran accompanied them to the docking bay. Before they boarded their vessel, he asked a final question. What are you building out there? The diplomat paused, then answered honestly. Something better. The second mission visited the Sarthi. The third visited the Oran Collective. The fourth contacted a civilization known as the Lyrants. Then another, and another, and another. The pattern remained remarkably consistent. Humanity arrived, offered something valuable, asked for nothing, left behind trust instead of obligations. Many governments found the approach unsettling. The Union had spent centuries conducting diplomacy through leverage, trade concessions, political favors, economic pressure, influence. Every relationship involved transactions. Humans operated differently. They built relationships first, structures second. By the end of the year, 11 of the 21 civilizations maintained active communications with humanity. Not alliances, not official partnerships. Something more flexible. Friendships. The same thing that had frightened the Union in the first place. Meanwhile, the settlements beyond charted space continued growing. Haven 1 expanded into a thriving colony. Shipyards multiplied. Manufacturing output increased exponentially. Haven 4 became a major industrial center. Haven 6 specialized in advanced propulsion production. A massive station under construction near the intersection of 3 expansion routes began attracting attention throughout the growing network. The project was enormous, larger than anything humanity had attempted before. Its official designation was Central Infrastructure Hub 8. No one called it that. The workers gave it another name. The Beacon. The name spread quickly, because it fit. The station stood at the heart of humanity's growing presence beyond known space. A place where routes converged, where ships gathered, where information flowed, where civilizations might someday meet. Elena visited frequently during construction. Every time she arrived, the station seemed larger, more complete, more alive. One evening, she stood on an observation deck overlooking the unfinished structure. Thousands of construction lights glittered across its expanding framework. Colonel Marcus Reeves joined her. For several minutes, they watched silently. Then Reeves spoke. Do you ever think about the vote? Every day. The Union thought it was ending something. Elena nodded. It did. Reeves looked at her. Then why does it feel like a beginning? She smiled faintly, because sometimes the same event can be both. Months later, intelligence reports began arriving from multiple sources. The information was subtle, scattered, difficult to verify, but the pattern was becoming clear. The Union was paying attention. Questions were being asked. Audits were being conducted. Investigations were expanding beyond normal administrative channels. Someone inside the Union had noticed that several of the 21 dissenting civilizations were behaving differently. Not enough to trigger disciplinary action. Enough to trigger curiosity. And curiosity, Elena knew, often came before concern. She reviewed the reports in silence, then looked toward the growing image of the beacon displayed above her desk. Construction would be finished soon, very soon, and when it was complete, she intended to invite every civilization that believed the future could be larger than the Union allowed. The gathering would change everything, assuming the Union didn't discover it first. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Elena found herself racing against a clock. And somewhere deep inside the administrative core of the Interstellar Union, another person had begun asking the same question. What exactly was humanity doing in the dark? The answer to that question arrived sooner than either side expected. Inside the Interstellar Union's Administrative Directorate, High Commissioner Vorental had spent nearly 40 years overseeing interspecies relations. He was not a military commander. He was not a politician in the traditional sense. He was an administrator, a man who believed every problem could be understood through reports, procedures, and patterns. That belief had served him well for decades. Now it was beginning to fail him. The first indication had been small. The Kareth declined participation in 2 economic review panels. The Sarthi delayed compliance reports. The Oran Collective quietly withdrew from a resource-sharing initiative they had previously supported. Individually, none of those actions meant much. Together, they formed a pattern. A subtle shift in behavior among civilizations that had voted against humanity's expulsion. Voren ordered a comprehensive review. The results troubled him. Officially, there had been no contact between humanity and any Union member species since the exile. No transmissions. No registered vessel movements. No trade activity. No diplomatic exchanges. Nothing. At first glance, the findings should have reassured him. Instead, they produced the opposite effect. Because absence itself could be evidence. The complete lack of detectable activity suggested one of 2 possibilities. Either humanity had truly disappeared behind the isolation boundary, or humanity was operating through channels the Union couldn't see. Voren suspected the second explanation. That suspicion grew stronger every day. 3 weeks later, he received another report. Long-range sensor stations positioned near the outer regions of Union territory had detected unidentified vessel signatures. The ships appeared briefly, then vanished. Their transit profiles matched no known propulsion system. The data was incomplete, fragmentary, but it was enough. Voren immediately authorized a deep-range survey operation. 32 vessels, extended sensor arrays, autonomous reconnaissance drones. Their mission was straightforward. Explore beyond the edge of Union charts. Find whatever humanity was hiding. The fleet departed quietly. No public announcements accompanied the operation. Officially, it was simply a scientific survey. Unofficially, it was the largest intelligence mission conducted in nearly a century. What Voren did not know was that the survey fleet's departure became known to humanity less than 24 hours later. Not through espionage, not through stolen data, through friendship. A Kareth official with contacts inside the Union administration heard rumors of the deployment. That official informed a Sarthi counterpart. The Sarthi passed the information onward. Within a day, the report reached Elena Ward. She read the message while standing inside the beacon's central assembly chamber. Construction crews moved across elevated platforms overhead. Engineers worked around unfinished systems. Thousands of workers rushed to complete final preparations. The station was almost finished. Almost. Colonel Reeves approached as she finished reading. Bad news. No. She handed him the report. Expected news. Reeves studied it. The survey fleet. Yes. They'll find us. Elena nodded. Eventually. The colonel considered that. Can we hide? We could. But. She smiled slightly. I'm tired of hiding. Reeves folded his arms. You want them to find the beacon. I want them to find something larger. The colonel understood immediately. The gathering. For months humanity had been preparing invitations. Not demands. not recruitment efforts. Invitations. Every civilization humanity had contacted would be welcome. Every species interested in a different future would have a seat. The assembly would occur at the beacon. And now the timeline had changed. The survey fleet was coming. That meant the gathering had to happen sooner. Elena activated a display. A map of known space appeared. Colored markers represented confirmed attendees. 21 civilizations. Then 24. Then 26. Additional confirmations had arrived throughout the week. Some surprised her. 3 species that had actually supported humanity's expulsion requested attendance. Not because they had changed history, because they had learned from it. The Union's treatment of dissenting members had raised uncomfortable questions. Questions many governments could no longer ignore. How quickly can we be ready? Elena asked. Reeves checked construction schedules. If we skip cosmetic work? Yes. 3 weeks. Then we do it in 3 weeks. The colonel nodded. No further discussion was necessary. Orders spread across the station within the hour. Construction accelerated. Crews worked around the clock. Entire sections of decorative architecture were postponed indefinitely. No one complained. The beacon wasn't meant to impress visitors. It was meant to bring them together. 3 weeks later, the first delegates arrived. Then more. Then more. Ships entered the system from every direction. Some came openly. Others arrived quietly. By the end of the second day, representatives from 28 civilizations occupied the beacon's assembly chamber. 28. More than Elena had dared hope. She stood near the center of the vast hall and watched them arrive. The room reflected the station itself. Practical, functional, honest. No towering monuments. No symbols of conquest. Just a space built for conversation. When the final delegation entered, the chamber doors closed. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Hundreds of individuals. Dozens of species. One shared purpose. Then Elena stepped forward. She hadn't prepared a speech. She had tried. Several times. Each version felt wrong. Too formal. Too political. Too similar to the language used by institutions she no longer trusted. So she spoke from memory instead. 2 years ago, she began. Humanity was told it no longer belonged. The hall remained silent. We were informed that cooperation required obedience. She paused. That stability required limitation. Another pause. That inclusion could be withdrawn. Delegates listened carefully. Elena continued. They believed exile would make us smaller. Her gaze moved across the room. It didn't. The silence deepened. Because this was never about humanity. She gestured toward the gathered representatives. It was about all of us. No applause followed. No interruption. Just attention. The kind that mattered more. For generations, we've been told that unity requires control. That cooperation requires hierarchy. That someone must always sit above everyone else. She shook her head. I don't believe that anymore. Several delegates exchanged glances. Others nodded. Elena continued. We built this place because we wanted to test another idea. She looked around the hall. That civilizations can work together without surrendering themselves. The words hung in the air. Then she delivered the sentence that would eventually be quoted across hundreds of worlds. No species should need permission to exist. For several seconds nobody moved. Then the Sarthi representative stood. After him, the Kareth. Then the Orin. One by one delegates rose from their seats. Not in ceremony. In agreement. By the end, every representative was standing. The document establishing the Free Systems Accord was signed that afternoon. Not an empire. Not a federation. Not a government. A voluntary alliance. Every member retained complete sovereignty. No civilization could be expelled. No central authority could overrule local governance. Participation would always remain a choice. 28 signatures appeared on the founding charter. History changed quietly. 6 days later, the Union survey fleet arrived. The commander expected hidden colonies. Perhaps a shipyard. Maybe an illegal military installation. What he found instead was an interstellar alliance. A message awaited him upon entering sensor range. The recording activated automatically. Elena Ward appeared on the display. Commander, she said calmly. Welcome. The officer blinked. That wasn't what he expected. Elena continued. You are observing the beacon, headquarters of the Free Systems Accord. Images appeared behind her. Member worlds. Trade routes. Settlement networks. Shipyards. Infrastructure. Growth. 28 civilizations have joined. The commander stared silently. We are not hostile to the Union. Elena's voice remained calm. We are not attempting conquest. More images appeared. Expanding colonies. Scientific exchanges. Joint development projects. A future already taking shape. We simply refuse to accept that cooperation requires control. The message paused briefly, then continued. There is one additional matter. The commander's stomach sank. He already knew what was coming. The settlers from the colony vessel Horizon remain in Union custody. 731 colonists. Still detained. Still waiting. We request their return. The commander exhaled slowly. The transmission ended. For several moments the bridge remained silent. Then one officer spoke quietly. What do we tell headquarters? The commander looked through the viewport at the beacon. At the hundreds of ships gathered around it. At the station humanity had built in the darkness. Then he answered honestly. We tell them they were wrong. The report reached the Union 7 days later. And when High Commissioner Vorental finished reading it, he understood something that no report could soften. Humanity had not been isolated. Humanity had been unleashed. And the consequences were only beginning. When High Commissioner Vorental finished reading the survey commander's report, he sat alone in his office for nearly an hour without speaking. The office overlooked the capital world of the Interstellar Union. Thousands of ships crossed the sky every day. Commerce flowed through orbital stations. Delegations arrived and departed according to schedules planned years in advance. Everything appeared stable, orderly, predictable. Yet for the first time in decades, Voren felt as though he was looking at a map that no longer matched the territory it described. The report sat open on his desk. 28 civilizations. Independent settlements beyond Union charts. A communications network operating outside Union infrastructure. Shipyards. Research centers. Trade routes. And a political alliance that had somehow emerged in less than 2 years. An alliance founded by a civilization the Union had intended to isolate. He read one section again. 28 member civilizations. 11 of them still active Union members. That fact alone threatened decades of assumptions. The Union had always believed membership demanded primary loyalty. The Accord appeared to operate on an entirely different principle. Participation without ownership. Cooperation without control. Voren disliked how attractive the idea sounded. Because attractive ideas spread, especially when they worked. Within 48 hours, emergency sessions were convened throughout the Union administration. Committees met. Reports were exchanged. Risk assessments were compiled. Publicly, officials maintained calm. Privately, concern grew. The problem wasn't military. Humanity had not built an invasion force. The problem wasn't economic. The Accord's trade volume remained modest compared to the Union's vast markets. The real threat was philosophical. The existence of the Accord challenged a belief that had guided Union governance for centuries. That large-scale cooperation required centralized authority. Humanity had just demonstrated another possibility, and people were noticing. Meanwhile, life aboard the beacon continued. New arrivals entered the system almost daily. Trade vessels, exploration ships, scientific expeditions. Representatives from civilizations that hadn't attended the founding assembly began requesting meetings. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they were dissatisfied with the status quo. A few arrived simply because they wanted options. Elena welcomed all of them. She had learned something during humanity's years inside the Union. People rarely changed their minds because they were pressured. They changed their minds because they saw alternatives. The beacon itself became that alternative. Delegations toured its facilities. Researchers exchanged information freely. Engineers from different species worked side by side. No one was required to join anything. No one was required to stay. And yet more people kept arriving. One evening, Elena stood in one of the station's observation galleries with Sophia Hart. The scientist watched ships moving between docking platforms. Traffic had become so heavy that new berths were already under construction. Remember when this place was just a blueprint? Sophia asked. Elena smiled. Barely. You expected growth. Yes. Sophia looked through the viewport. Did you expect this much? Elena took her time answering. No. Because the truth surprised even her. The Accord was growing faster than projections suggested. Not explosively. Organically. Which made it harder to stop. Ideas imposed from above could collapse when leadership changed. Ideas adopted voluntarily tended to survive. A soft chime interrupted their conversation. Elena checked the incoming notification. Her expression sharpened immediately. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "A diplomatic request." "From who?" Elena stared at the sender identification. "The Union." 3 weeks later, the meeting took place aboard a neutral station located near the edge of Union territory. The Union delegation arrived first. 3 senior administrators, 2 legal advisors, a security team that looked uncomfortable being there. Elena arrived with only 2 representatives from the Accord. The contrast was impossible to miss. The discussions began politely. Formal greetings, procedural acknowledgments, carefully measured language. Then the real conversation started. A Union administrator activated a display. "The Free Systems Accord has expanded rapidly." "Yes," Elena replied. "You now maintain settlements beyond surveyed territory." "Correct. Several Union member civilizations have joined your organization." "Voluntarily." The administrator nodded. "That is part of our concern." Elena almost laughed. Of course it was. The meeting continued for hours. The Union representatives discussed regulations, jurisdiction, membership conflicts, administrative complications. Elena listened patiently. Then she spoke. "You keep describing a problem." The administrator frowned. "Because there is a problem." "No." Elena leaned forward slightly. "There is a change." The distinction mattered. The Union had spent centuries treating change as something dangerous, something to be managed, contained, controlled. The Accord viewed it differently, as opportunity. The discussion grew more direct after that. Eventually, one of the administrators asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "What exactly do you want?" Elena answered immediately. "The settlers." Silence followed. Everyone in the room knew who she meant. The 731 colonists from the vessel Horizon, still held under administrative supervision, still waiting. The lead Union representative folded his hands. "The matter remains under review." Elena's expression didn't change. "They've been under review for almost 2 years. These situations require." "People aren't situations." The interruption landed harder than she intended. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Elena continued in a calmer tone. "They left Earth to build a future." She looked around the table. "They didn't commit crimes." No response. "They weren't convicted of anything." Still nothing. "They were simply convenient." The room remained silent. Elena activated her own display. A series of images appeared. Accord settlements, research facilities, growing communities, new cities under construction, children attending schools on worlds that hadn't even been colonized 2 years earlier. This exists now. The delegates watched quietly. The future they were denied exists. She met their eyes. And it belongs to them too. The meeting ended without an official resolution. But something had changed. The Union delegation had seen reality firsthand. Not reports, not projections. Reality. And reality was becoming difficult to ignore. 12 days later, the Union responded. Not through public announcement. Not through political ceremony. Through paperwork. An administrative release order. 731 colonists were transferred to Accord custody. The decision arrived so quietly that many people didn't even realize it had happened until the transports were already underway. Elena traveled personally to receive them. The transfer occurred near the former isolation boundary surrounding human space. A civilian transport emerged from jump transit. Then another. Then a third. The ships docked with the reception facility one after another. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first hatch opened. People began walking out. Families, engineers, scientists, children who had grown older while waiting. 731 lives interrupted. Now finally moving forward again. Elena stood near the arrivals corridor. Not speaking, simply watching. A young boy stepped through the hatch holding his mother's hand. He couldn't have been older than 6. The child looked around curiously. At the human personnel. At the banners of the Accord. At the bustling reception center. Then he looked up at his mother. "Are we home?" The woman smiled through tears. "Yes." The word hit Elena harder than she expected. Home. Not Earth. Not a specific planet. A future. That was what the Accord had really become. A place where futures remained possible. By the time the last colonist completed processing, celebration was spreading across dozens of worlds. The settlers were free. The Accord continued expanding. And throughout the galaxy, more civilizations were beginning to pay attention. Membership applications increased steadily. Trade networks expanded. Joint scientific projects multiplied. The Union still remained larger, older, more powerful on paper, but size was no longer the only measure that mattered, because momentum had shifted. 1 year after the founding of the Accord, membership reached 41 civilizations. 6 months later, it reached 48. The projections continued rising. One evening, long after most of the beacon's administrative staff had gone home, Colonel Reeves entered Elena's office carrying a data tablet. "You should see this." Elena accepted it. Membership forecasts, expansion rates, infrastructure growth, population projections. She reviewed the numbers silently, then looked up. "Are these accurate?" Reeves nodded. "Conservative estimates." Elena stared at the display. The implications were enormous. At current growth rates, the Accord would soon surpass the number of civilizations that had originally founded the Interstellar Union centuries earlier. Not because it conquered anyone, not because it forced membership, because people kept choosing it. Reeves moved toward the observation window. Outside, thousands of lights illuminated the beacon. Ships arrived and departed continuously. A city among the stars. A symbol that hadn't existed 3 years earlier. "Do you think they understand?" he asked quietly. "The Union?" Reeves nodded. Elena considered the question. Far beyond the station, ships crossed the darkness carrying ideas, technologies, friendships, and possibilities that no committee had approved. The same things that had frightened the Union enough to exile humanity in the first place. Eventually she smiled. "Not yet." Reeves looked at her. "But they will." Outside the window, the stars stretched endlessly into the darkness. Once, the Union had believed that darkness could be used as a prison. Humanity had discovered something different. The dark wasn't empty. It was opportunity. And now an entire alliance was learning how to build within it. The Interstellar Union did not collapse quickly. It rarely did anything quickly. Its strength had always been its patience, its layers of procedure, its ability to turn urgency into paperwork and crisis into committees. But what was happening now did not fit neatly into any of its categories. And that made it dangerous. High Commissioner Vorental stood before the Central Assembly and watched projections of the Free Systems Accord spread across the chamber walls. 48 civilizations. Independent infrastructure spanning regions the Union had never prioritized. Communication routes moving faster than any sanctioned model accounted for. And most troubling of all, Union member civilizations continuing to remain within that structure while still officially holding Union status. Dual alignment. A concept the Union had never prepared for. Because in its logic, loyalty was supposed to be singular. "You are telling us," one senior delegate said slowly, "that containment failed." Voren did not answer immediately. He had spent his entire career trusting language. But language was failing here. So he chose clarity instead. "Yes," he said. A quiet tension spread through the chamber. Another delegate leaned forward. "Containment did not fail," she corrected. "Containment was never properly tested. They were supposed to be isolated." Voren looked at her. "And yet they are not isolated." Silence followed. A third voice spoke. "Then what are they?" No one answered at first, because the answer was uncomfortable. Finally, Voren spoke. "A parallel structure." The phrase landed heavily. Not rebellion. Not insurgency. Something worse from the Union's perspective. A functioning alternative. Because rebellion still acknowledged the system it opposed. But an alternative simply stopped needing it. That was the moment the Union realized the problem was no longer about control. It was about relevance. Across the chamber, arguments began forming rapidly. Some called for stricter enforcement of the isolation boundary. Others proposed sanctions against member civilizations maintaining dual participation. A few suggested military demonstration missions to reassert authority in fringe systems. But none of the proposals resolved the central issue. The Accord was not breaking rules. It was bypassing the need for them. And it was doing so openly. On screens across the chamber, data continued to update. Membership growth, increasing. Trade volume, increasing. Settlement expansion, increasing. Request for Accord affiliation from non-member civilizations, increasing. And then a report appeared that silenced even the most vocal delegates. A Union-aligned civilization had formally requested observer status within the Accord. A full member of the Union. Not defecting, not rebelling, simply asking to observe. That single request did more damage than any border violation could have. Because it suggested curiosity. And curiosity, once institutionalized, spreads faster than authority can regulate it. Vorin dismissed the chamber shortly afterward. He did not feel victory or defeat, only recognition. Something had shifted in the structure of interstellar politics, and it was no longer reversible through traditional means. Meanwhile, far beyond Union-controlled space, the beacon continued to grow. The station had transformed again. What had once been a central hub was now the heart of a vast, interconnected lattice. Ships moved through it constantly. Civilizations arrived daily. The population was no longer measured in visitors, but in participating systems. Elena Ward stood on the central observation platform, watching it all unfold. Colonel Reeves joined her silently. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Reeves broke the silence. "They're coming." Elena nodded. "Yes. You think the Union will escalate?" "I think they will try to understand first. And after that." Elena watched a fleet of ships dock along the outer ring of the station. "After that," she said quietly, "it depends on whether they can accept that they are no longer the center of everything." Reeves exhaled slowly. "That's not something empires do easily." Elena glanced at him. "This isn't an empire." He raised an eyebrow. "What is it then?" She considered the question for a long time. Outside the viewport, ships moved like streams of light across the darkness. Civilizations arriving not because they were forced, but because they chose to. Eventually she answered. "It's a correction." The final turning point came from an unexpected place. A transmission arrived from the Sarthi Enclave. Velden himself appeared on the display. His expression was serious. "We have a situation," he said. Elena straightened immediately. "What kind of situation?" "The Union has begun deploying observation fleets deeper into fringe space." Reeves stepped closer. "How many?" 37 confirmed vessels, Velden replied. "Possibly more." Elena exhaled slowly. "So they've stopped pretending this is just data collection." Velden nodded. "They are mapping the accord." Silence followed. Then Elena asked the question that mattered. "Are they preparing for confrontation?" Velden hesitated. "That is unclear." But his tone suggested otherwise. After the transmission ended, Reeves turned to Elena. "So it begins." Elena shook her head slightly. "No." Reeves frowned. "No. This isn't the beginning," she said. "It's the confirmation." She looked toward the central display. The Accord's expansion map glowed across it. Dozens of systems connected through shared infrastructure. Hundreds of vessels moving freely. Civilizations interacting without permission structures. And at the center of it all, a simple principle. No one could be removed. No one could be silenced. No one could be made irrelevant. Elena spoke quietly. "They thought they were ending us." Reeves watched her. "What did they actually do?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "They taught us how to exist without them." The Union survey fleet reached the outer Accord boundary 17 days later. What they found was not resistance, not fortifications, not a military blockade. Instead, they found signals. Open channels broadcasting continuously. Welcome messages transmitted on all standard frequencies. And a map. A complete map of Accord space. Every settlement. Every route. Every system. It was an invitation to observe. The fleet commander hesitated before sending his report. When he finally did, it was short. "There is no defensive perimeter." A pause. Only presence. Back in Union space, Vorin read the message in silence. Then he leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the expulsion, he allowed himself a thought he had been avoiding. The Union had assumed exile would weaken humanity. It had assumed isolation would restore balance. It had assumed control would remain where it had always been. But assumptions, he realized, did not shape reality. Only outcomes did. And the outcome now unfolding was clear. Humanity had not been diminished. It had adapted. And in adapting, it had created something the Union did not yet know how to categorize. A civilization that did not need permission to exist. A network that expanded not through conquest, but through consent. A structure that could not be contained because it was not centralized. And as Vorin watched the projections shift once again, he understood the final truth of it. The Union had not exiled a problem. It had released a solution. And now the galaxy would have to adjust. Outside, across unimaginable distances, ships continued to move through the dark. Not fleeing, not hiding, building, always building. And for the first time in centuries, the center of the galaxy was no longer a place. It was an idea. And ideas, Vorin realized, do not respect borders. They spread.